Now, as your organizations grow, you may want to have a time and attendance device or some time and attendance system to track your time-rated employees' time, because of course they are paid based on days work. Now, how do you integrate that time and attendance system with TechlifyHR? TechlifyHR has an import workflow where you have an Excel file that will generally be sent out from your time and attendance device. This file is configurable, and you can import that file into TechlifyHR. Now, if we look at our time-rated employees, we have 2 time-rated employees here, and there are a number of ways that we can import data for them. So let's just go ahead and download the sample file. You'll see that the sample file has a host of columns that you can use, and if we go through the instructions, firstly, we need to use a specific date format, and then how do we link or specify which employee the timesheet is for? You can use first name and last name, you can use employee number, or you can use all 3. How does TechlifyHR calculate total hours in the export? There are a host of rules here. You have the option to specify overtime hours, standard hours. You can also even specify total hours, and then TechlifyHR will calculate overtime and standard hours for you. And then you have the ability to specify overtime hours at 2x, because the overtime hours field uses whatever overtime rate you have on your employee salary, which is generally 1.5x, but you can also specify overtime at 2x and even absent hours. So there are a host of different ways that you can structure your sheet. Generally, you'll want to configure this from your time and attendance device, but let's look at a few options here. Now, we do see that Jenny, Albion, Jon, are our employees, and their employee number 2 and 5, and I have a couple of sheets that I had pre-built. So let's look at our sample file. So this is our sample file. Again, it has a host of data that we can use in our workflow for importing data. Now let's look at the first example here. So here's a first file that I created, and you see here we're using employee number only. If I'm comparing this to the sample file, you see the sample file has first name, last name, but if you remember the instruction, you don't need all of that. And we're looking at June data here. You'll see that for the employee number, I'm adding 5 entries, which is basically the first week in June. So the first week in June is from the 2nd to the 6th. All right, I'm adding those 5 entries for employee number 2 and employee number 5, and I'm specifying the time in, time out, and the total hours. And again, remember, we can specify total hours, we can specify standard hours, overtime hours. So let's go ahead and import this data. I'll drag and drop my file here. There's an employee matching system, a field matching system rather, and let me go and import this. Data gets validated. Once the data is fine, it gets imported, and then we click on that to view our imported records. Just a filter to review that, and there we go. If you remember, we had 5 records that were imported. Again, let's just have a quick look at our sheet. Notice it uses employee numbers, but here you'll see we have for June 2nd, we have for Jenny and Jon. 3rd, same thing, 4th, 5th, 6th, and you will see that the system, we entered total hours. TechlifyHR used those total hours, and based on the employee salaries, it calculated standard hours, which if we open Jenny's profile, we will see that Jenny works 8 hours per day as standard, and her overtime rate by default is 1.5. So you will see the TechlifyHR took the 10 hours for June 6th, which is what we had here, 10 hours, set the 8 hours as our standard daily hours, and then the overtime hours, which is the balance, being 2 hours at 1.5 rate, and you'll see that's how those records are important. So we now have our timesheet entries for the first week of June into the system, and that's one way that you can do this. And let's look at some other ways. Let's go back to import again, and once again I've prepped another sheet for the second week of June. Again, Jenny and Jon, but in this case you'll notice that I'm using their names instead of their employee numbers. So you can use the names or the employee numbers. And in the previous import, let me just open that back, you'll see I gave the system total hours, and TechlifyHR then took that and calculated standard and overtime. In this case, I'm going to say, hey, these are my standard and these are my overtime. I'm not providing total. I'm also providing some particulars here. So let's go ahead and now import this second version. And just one quick point of note as well is that this is for the second week in June, because you see it's from 9/10 to 13. So I'll go ahead and import this. Again, there's a field matching. We have another 6 properties here instead of 5. Everything looks good. I'll go next. The data gets validated, and there you go. We do have a problem because we have an invalid time in or time out, and that is a required field. So I just wanted to show you how this might look like if we wanted to add, if we had errors in our sheet rather. All right. So you want to add your time in and your time out dates, even though you're having standard hours here. That is a missing. Those are required fields. But let's skip past this now and let's go to our third import format, which is what I wanted to show you as well. Is that while the first two we imported day by day, the third import format, you can also import your data on a weekly basis. So if we're looking at the third week in June, which goes from the 16th to the 20th, you'll see I can put my time in at 16th and my time out at the 20th. And I notice I have time in, time out here. And I can specify the total standard hours, the total overtime hours. In my particulars, I have week 3 and another overtime at 2x column, right? So remember, in our instructions, there's the option to add overtime at 2x. So let's see what this import looks like. We're importing week 3. Again, you see there's a good matching system here, and let's see if we have any errors. Okay, overtime at 2x, it does not match any column in the system. But if we go here, we see overtime hours at 2x, so I can select that and just hit next. Our data gets validated. Once that passes, our data gets imported. And if I go ahead and view the imported records, once again, let's just refresh that, we will see that we do have 4 entries here. And why do we have 4 entries? It's because each timesheet record only has the ability to add one type of overtime. And if you remember, let's open our sheet. Here, you'll see that we have 2 entries for week 3. Let's look at Jenny first. 40 standard, 27 overtime, and then we also have overtime at 2x. So if we look at Jenny now, we'll see that, hey, we had 40 standard and 25 overtime at 1.5 rate. TechlifyHR automatically creates a second entry for the 8 hours overtime at the 2x rate. And the same thing is done for Jon here. And that is how you can import timesheets with a weekly total. Again, your time and attendance device is generally able to export aggregated numbers for you of hours, and it even has overtime at 1.5, overtime at 2x, and that type of breakdown. And TechlifyHR does support all of that. There are even columns for importing absence in TechlifyHR. So if I can just I'm not going to re-import this, but let me just show you some of the column options. If we're looking here, see, we can match employee number, date time in, out, standard hours, overtime at 2x, the overtime rate. Even if you wanted to specify a custom rate that's not here, let's say you pay overtime at 1.25 or 2.25, you can specify that. You can also add bonus absent days. Again, if you have any bonus system, you can import that, and that would automatically be linked to the other income bonus. And you can even tag timesheets. So for cases, let's say you have a single employee working at 2 or 3 different locations, and different timesheet entries are for different locations, you're able to tag that by the location, and that gets imported into TechlifyHR. So what I really wanted to demonstrate is how to use the timesheet import and just the flexibility and the different options that you have when importing timesheets. Of course, my advice to you is to choose one that works best for you, that your time and attendance device can give you the exported data for, and just use that overall. for your company. Now, to tie this all up, I know we have been focusing a lot on fixed rated payroll, but let's go and create a June payroll for our time rated employees. All right, and we see Jon. Jenny is not here, but that's because we selected only Essequibo, but let's go ahead and remove that. So we see both Jon and Jenny. And if I hit save, we will see that their data is getting calculated. I'll just go ahead and do a quick refresh here. There we go. And if I go to the pay sheet, we'll see that all of the timesheet entries that we would have added gets aggregated, right? And of course, this being a fixed time rated timesheet, we want to use our time rated pay sheet format, which will give us the work hours, the overtime amount, and the overtime hours, so we can then see that the data that we would have imported is aggregated correctly, because remember, we successfully imported 2 weeks of 40 hours each, and then some overtime hours for both Jon and Jenny. And there you go, it all ties back into your payroll.